Captain Mira Torres sat in the cockpit of her CH-47 Chinook, the radio report crawling through the speakers and turning her blood cold. All units be advised. Operation Valkyrie is a total loss. SEAL Teams 2, 5, and 8 are cut off in Razan Gorge. Estimated 180 operators surrounded by enemy forces numbering 800 plus. Weather prohibits air support. Ground relief 48 hours out. Command assessment, total loss expected within 6 hours. All aircraft remain at base. Repeat, no rescue attempts authorized. Her co-pilot, Warrant Officer Ryan Cole, stared at her with that stunned, resigned look and said, "They're writing them off. 180 SEALs, and command's just leaving them? That isn't an assessment," Mira replied softly, her voice tight with a controlled fury. "That's a death sentence." She'd flown combat rescue missions in eastern Arkan province for 3 years, pulled wounded from hot LZs, evacuated whole platoons under fire, and set her Chinook down where the manuals said you couldn't. That had made her one of the best pilots in the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. Still, she'd never seen anything like this. 180 Navy SEALs, the nation's finest, trapped in a gorge that looked set to be their grave. Command had run the numbers, weighed the risks, and coldly decided that sending rescue birds would only add casualties to a catastrophic tally. They were probably right. The weather was collapsing fast. A late-season storm sweeping through the mountains with winds that made helicopter flights suicidal and visibility that wrecked navigation. And the enemy had anti-air positions littered through the gorge and knew exactly where the SEALs were. Any helicopter that went in would be flying into a meat grinder. Command was making the rational choice, the safe choice that preserved aircraft and crews for missions with better odds. Mira had always followed orders, played by the rules, been the Army's example of professionalism, discipline, reliability, but she was also the daughter of a Marine who died in Fallujah when his squad was pinned down and no relief made it in time. She'd joined the Army promising herself she'd never let that happen again if she could stop it. And right now she had a helicopter, fuel, tanks, and the skill to fly it into hell if it came to that. "Ryan," she said, fingers already moving over the panel as she started pre-flight checks. "I need you honest. Can you fly this bird back to base by yourself?" He went very still. "Mira, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking command gave an order I can't follow. I'm thinking 180 SEALs are going to die if nobody does something. And I'm thinking I'm going to do something. But I don't want to drag you into a court-martial with me." "You serious?" It wasn't a question. Ryan had flown with her long enough to know when she'd decided. "You're really going to disobey a direct order, fly into the worst weather we've seen all season, into a gorge full of anti-aircraft, to try a rescue command call's impossible?" "Yes, it's insane. Career suicide. Probably literal suicide." He paused, ran his own checks, then said, "I'm coming with you." "Ryan, if you're going to get court-martialed for this, I'm not letting you do it alone," she said. He gave a humorless grin. "You're going to need a co-pilot anyway. That gorge will eat you alive if you try to run it solo." Mira felt a rush of gratitude tangled with guilt. They were about to wreck both their careers, assuming they lived long enough to face a court-martial. But she couldn't stand by and let 180 men die without trying. She keyed the radio to the frequency the trapped SEALs were on. "Any Valkyrie units? This is Night Stalker 4-6, do you copy?" Static answered. Then a voice, thin with stress and exhaustion. "Night Stalker 4-6, this is Valkyrie 2-1. We read you. Be advised, we are combat ineffective, ammo critical, Casualties mounting, insurgent forces closing on all sides. We've accepted extraction is not possible. Preparing for last stand. Recommend you maintain distance and preserve aircraft for missions that matter. The voice sounded like someone who'd already accepted dying and was trying to save others from the same fate. Valkyrie 2-1, negative. I'm inbound for extraction. Prepare your wounded for immediate medevac. I'll be in your LZ in 30 minutes. Silence stretched. Then the reply came cold. Night Stalker 4-6, you are not authorized for this mission. Command has ordered no fly for this sector. I'm aware of Command's orders, Valkyrie 2-1, Mira shot back. I'm also aware that you and 179 other operators are about to die if someone doesn't ignore those orders. Prepare for extraction. Night Stalker 4-6 out. She flipped back to base frequency and braced. The response was immediate and furious. Night Stalker 4-6, this is Fort Valiant Tower. You are not cleared for takeoff. Repeat, you are not cleared for takeoff. Shut down your aircraft immediately. Mira eased the collective and felt the Chinook lift. Fort Valiant Tower, Night Stalker 4-6, declaring emergency authority under combat search and rescue protocols. American forces in imminent danger. I am moving to assist. 4-6 is outbound. The tower's answer was short and lethal. You are disobeying a direct order. Return to base immediately or face court-martial. Understood, Tower. I'll see you at the court-martial, if I survive long enough to attend, she said, cutting the radio before they could reply. Ryan was already pulling nav data for Razan Gorge. You know this is probably the last flight we'll ever make as Army pilots. I know, she said, and pointed the Chinook toward the mountains, the storm, the gorge where 180 SEALs waited to die. At least it would be a flight that mattered. 90 minutes earlier, the operation had gone in like clockwork. 3 SEAL teams, 60 men each, inserted into Razan Gorge under cover of darkness to capture or kill a high-value target. Khaled Darzi, a commander who coordinated attacks across the region. Intelligence said Darzi would be meeting others in a compound deep in the gorge. Plan was simple. Fast insertion, hit the compound, secure or eliminate Darzi, extract before the enemy could react. Team 2 hit the northern approach. Team 5 took the compound. Team 8 set a southern perimeter. Everything was right, until it wasn't. The compound was empty. Darzi wasn't there, nor any other high-value target. Instead, they found a huge weapons cache, comms gear, and maps showing insurgent positions all across the gorge. It was a trap, and the SEALs had walked straight into it. The enemy had known they were coming and had baited them. They'd rigged the compound as bait, planted forces all around the gorge, and waited for American special ops to walk right into it. The moment the SEALs entered, the insurgents sprung the trap and anti-aircraft guns opened up on the extraction birds before they could set down. 2 Blackhawks took hits. One was vaporized, crew of 4 killed. The other limped back to base smoking and barely flyable, and the SEALs, realizing they'd been ambushed, fought to break out. But they were boxed in by mountains with hostile forces on every side. The insurgents had the high ground, the numbers, and prepared positions. So the SEAL leaders did what they were trained to do: consolidate, form a defensive perimeter, call for support. Then the weather turned rotten. The storm system forecasters expected tomorrow arrived early, whipping winds that grounded helicopters and clouds that made close air support impossible. Apaches couldn't fly. A-10 Warthogs couldn't see targets through the cloud deck, and even drones were useless in the turbulence. Command tried everything. They pushed for a ground relief, but the nearest friendly units were 48 hours away through hostile country. Coordination with local forces failed, either unwilling or incapable of entering what was clearly a death trap. The SEALs were on their own. With ammo dwindling, casualties rising, and enemy forces closing, they had maybe 6 hours before the perimeter gave. Command made the call. Mission is a total loss. The calculus was that sending more forces in risked more lives than it might save, so officially there'd be no rescue. Unofficially, the rationale that made Mira's choice easier. Command was abandoning 180 operators because the numbers didn't justify the risk. She understood that math. She even agreed with it in the abstract. Sending helicopters into Razan Gorge in those conditions, through known anti-air positions, with 0 KS was suicide. But she also understood what the colonels and generals in warm ops centers didn't. Sometimes the right thing is also the dumbest, most dangerous, most likely to get you killed thing you can do. And sometimes you do it anyway. The flight into hell began, and the weather was far worse than Mira expected. The wind slammed them as soon as they climbed, buffeting the Chinook like a toy. 50, 60, 70-mile-an-hour gusts hit from all directions, making steady flight nearly impossible. "This is insane," Ryan said, wrestling the controls as a gust nearly tossed them sideways. "We're going to get torn apart before we even reach the gorge." "Then we better fly faster than the weather can catch us," Mira shot back, throttling the Chinook and wringing every knot of speed from the beast. The Chinook was a workhorse, reliable, powerful, built to haul heavy loads. But it wasn't nimble, it wasn't fast, and it certainly wasn't made for mountain storms that grounded most aircraft. Mira wasn't most pilots. She'd been flying since childhood. Her father put her in small planes at 6. She soloed at 16, got her helicopter rating at 18, and joined the Army at 20. And a decade of flying in sandstorms, whiteout blizzards, and combat zones had taught her to read weather, predict wind patterns, find pockets of stable air between gusts, use terrain to hide from turbulence, and skim low to avoid the worst of it. She knew how to make a 30-ton helicopter dance through places that looked impossible. She was going to need every ounce of that now. As they closed on the gorge, Ryan called the nav. Insurgent positions confirmed at 3 sites. Probably more we don't know about. "Then we fly low and fast," Mira said. "Make ourselves hard to track, harder to hit," Mira said, and dropped the Chinook toward the deck, skimming barely 200 feet above the mountainside and letting the terrain mask their approach as the radio crackled. "Night Stalker 4-6. This is Valkyrie 2-1. We're tracking your approach. Be advised, the gorge is extremely hot. We count at least 6 anti-air positions, multiple heavy MGs, and probable shoulder-fired missiles. Weather's gone to hell. Visibility may be 200 meters. You need to turn back." "Negative, Valkyrie 2-1, Mira answered. "I'm committed. Give me your exact position and have your wounded ready for immediate load." 4-6, we've got 80-plus casualties, 30 critical. Mira had already run the numbers. A Chinook could carry roughly 55 troops plus crew. So with 180 in the gorge, she'd need at least 3 trips. Probably more once you factored in wounded and gear. Into a valley ringed by enemy positions and weather getting worse by the minute. With AA tracking every move, she'd be lucky to survive a single sortie. "Then I'll make multiple trips," she said flatly. "First priority, critical cases. Get them to the LZ, I'll be there in 5 minutes." Ryan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Multiple trips? Mira, we probably won't survive the first one. If we go back in, we go back until everyone's out or we're dead. Those are the only two options I'm weighing. Ahead, the gorge mouth yawned, a narrow cut between towering peaks, clouds scraping the ridgelines, visibility collapsing. It looked like flying into a tunnel that led straight to hell. "Here we go," Mira said, and pointed the Chinook in. The world exploded. Tracer fire lanced the sky, bright threads hunting the helicopter. Explosions from AA pits erupted from the slopes, filling the air with steel and fire aimed at them. Mira put the bird through violent, evasive work. Hard banks, sudden climbs, dropping into gullies, then popping up, using every contour to break targeting solutions. Rounds pinged off the armored skin, blasts rocked the airframe, alarms screamed about damage and failing systems and 1,000 ways they might die. But the Chinook kept moving. "LZ's ahead," Ryan called. "I see friendlies." Through smoke and chaos, Mira spotted them. SEALs dug in. A cleared patch at the center with casualties on stretchers and enemy forces closing from every side. There was no time for a gentle landing. She slammed the Chinook into the LZ hard, wheels thudding with a jarring impact that made the airframe shudder. "Go, go, go!" she barked over the TroopCom intercom as the rear ramp dropped. SEALs surged up the ramp carrying stretchers, efficient and practiced even amid the madness, loading wounded, securing kit, laying down suppressive fire while Mira kept the engines hot and ready. Rounds pinged off the armored hull. An RPG screamed past close enough for her to feel its heat. The SEALs returned fire, holding the perimeter long enough for the wounded to get aboard. 30 seconds, Ryan counted, watching the load. A SEAL commander, a captain, ran to the cockpit, shouting to be heard over the roar. "You're either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest. We're loading critical now. 33 wounded coming with you, but 147 still here and the enemy's closing," he yelled. "I'll be back," Mira shouted. "Get them ready for the next lift." "You're coming back? Into this?" the captain asked, looking at her like she'd lost it, which, she admitted, might be true. "I'm not leaving until everyone's out or I'm dead. Be ready in 20. "Loaded," Ryan called. 33 wounded plus 4 medics. "We're at max." Mira pulled collective and the Chinook climbed out. Instantly, every AA position in the gorge opened up, tracers and explosions filling the sky. An alarm screamed missile lock. She hurled the Chinook into a violent evasive, dropped into a ravine to break the lock, and watched the missile detonate against the mountainside. "We're taking hits," Ryan reported. Hydraulics dinged, fuel line leaking, electrical faults flashing. Would she keep flying? For now. She didn't answer. She flew, threading the damaged bird through the valley, dodging fire and using every trick she knew until they burst out of the gorge mouth into cleaner air. The AA fire fell off. The storm still howled, but after that hell, it felt almost calm. 33 down, 147 to go, Mira said grimly, heading for Fort Valiant to drop casualties and refuel. Then Ryan, already knowing the answer, asked, "Then we go back?" "As many times as it takes," she replied. The second run. Fort Valiant airfield was chaos when they touched down. Medics rushed the wounded off the Chinook, while ground crews swarmed the bird, checking damage and prepping to refuel. Waiting beside them stood military police, and a Colonel Mira didn't recognize strode toward her as she climbed from the cockpit. "Captain Torres, you're under arrest for disobeying direct orders, unauthorized mission, and reckless endangerment." "I'm also going back to get the rest of my passengers," Mira replied evenly. "So you'll have to arrest me later." "Captain, You're not going anywhere but the brig. I've been ordered to ground your aircraft and detain you pending court-martial. Colonel, she said, her voice like steel, there are 147 Navy SEALs still trapped in that gorge. They'll die if no one extracts them. I'm the only pilot crazy enough to try. So either let me go or explain to their families why you stopped me. The order came from, I don't care if it came from the president himself. I'm going. You can court-martial me, discharge me, lock me up for life, but I'm bringing those men home first. The colonel studied her for a long moment, then, against all odds, stepped aside. Ground crew, expedite refuel and repairs. Captain Torres launches in 15 minutes. Mira blinked. Sir? I said 15 minutes, Captain. If you're going to throw away your career, the least I can do is make sure your helicopter's airworthy. My son's a SEAL, Team 5. He's in that gorge. Bring him back. I will, sir, she said quietly. I'll bring them all back. 15 minutes later, she lifted off again, the Chinook patched together as best as the crews could manage. She knew she was flying a crippled machine, too much damage, too many compromised systems, but 147 lives depended on her. The second approach was worse than the first. The enemy knew a helicopter had made it in and out and were waiting. They'd repositioned their anti-air weapons, reinforced lines, ready for her return. Mira came in from the west this time, through a different mountain pass, slipping past the first defenses before they spotted her. Then all hell broke loose again. The Chinook shuddered under multiple impacts, alarms screaming while Ryan read out damage. Hydraulics hit, engine temps rising, oil pressure dropping, tail rotor compromised. But somehow the bird still flew. She managed to set down and load 52 more SEALs, fewer than she wanted, as they stuffed aboard gear, weapons, intel, things too valuable to leave. Lifting through the same gauntlet, she dodged and weaved, feeling bullets punch the hull and controls resist under strain, but they clawed clear. 95 out, 85 to go. The Chinook was dying. She could feel it in the sluggish stick, the shuddering frame, the forest of warning lights. We're not making a fourth trip, Ryan said quietly as Fort Valiant came into view. She's holding together with prayers and tape. One more run and she'll fall apart. Then we make this third one count, Mira answered. We get them all out, every single one. That's impossible. We're overweight with 50. 85, she said. Everyone. I'm not leaving anyone behind, Ryan. Not one left behind. They landed at Fort Valiant long enough to dump the second load and take on fuel. No MPs tried to stop them this time. And word had spread, so everyone from the ground crews to the base commander moved to help. The third approach was pure hell. The enemy had figured her pattern, and they were ready. AA fire filled the sky until it looked solid with tracers, missiles streaking up, and the Chinook took blow after blow. Engine 2 is losing power, Ryan shouted. We're on fire. Suppress the fire and keep flying. Mira fought the controls as the bird tried to tumble out of the sky. They reached the LZ where the remaining 85 SEALs were stacked together with wounded in the center. They loaded with brutal speed, every man knowing this was the last chance. We're overloaded, Ryan reported. Way overloaded. It'll fly, Mira said through clenched teeth. I'll make it fly. She pulled collective and begged the damaged, heavy Chinook to do the impossible. Engines screamed, the airframe groaned, systems were all redlined, and then, impossibly, the Chinook rose. 50 feet up, a missile slammed into the tail. The blast shredded the rear rotor and the bird spun wildly, alarms howling, Ryan shouting. The ground rushed up. Mira's hands moved with desperate precision. She couldn't stop the spin, but she could slow it and choose how it hit. The Chinook slammed down hard, landing gear crushed, metal buckled, it skidded across rock, tearing itself apart, but staying intact just enough to shelter those inside. When it finally stopped, Mira was alive and conscious at the controls. "Everyone out! Move, move, move!" she screamed, and the SEALs poured from the wreck, some helping the wounded, others taking up defensive positions. SEALs spilled from the wrecked helicopter, some dragging the wounded, others dropping to secure firing lines. The enemy was closing in fast. Certain victory was theirs. But they hadn't accounted for what 180 Navy SEALs could do when cornered and fighting for their lives. The teams formed a tight perimeter, and what came next was a brutal close-quarters fight, the kind of desperate combat only special operators truly train for. Outnumbered, low on ammo, they still held their ground with surgical precision. Then, like the cavalry in some old western, salvation screamed over the ridgeline. Apache gunships. The storm had cracked open just enough for them to fly, and when they spotted the grounded Chinook surrounded by enemy forces, they didn't hesitate. Hellfire missiles and 30mm cannon fire ripped into hostile positions. Within minutes, the tide flipped, the enemy broke, and more aircraft were inbound. Command had scrambled a full combat rescue package the moment word spread about Mira's third run. It took 6 more helicopters to pull everyone out. Mira, Ryan, and the survivors of the destroyed aircraft included. But they all made it home. All 180 SEALs, all the wounded, every last one. Because one pilot had ignored the math, defied orders, and flown into hell. The court-martial that followed lasted 3 days. Mira was charged with disobeying direct orders, undertaking an unauthorized mission, and reckless endangerment of aircraft and personnel. She pled guilty to all counts. The prosecutor pushed for dishonorable discharge and prison. Then something no one expected happened. The SEALs showed up. All of them. The courtroom overflowed. One by one, they testified about the pilot who flew through the impossible to bring them back alive. They spoke of her skill, her courage, her absolute refusal to quit. The SEAL captain, son of Colonel Harland, the man who'd let her fly that second mission, told the panel that Captain Mira Torres was the finest pilot he'd ever known. The jury deliberated 20 minutes, guilty on all charges, but sentenced only to a formal reprimand and 30 days confined to base, with a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. 6 months later, Mira stood in the Pentagon as the Secretary of Defense pinned the medal on her chest. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety in the successful rescue of 180 personnel under extreme combat conditions. What the citation didn't say was that she'd broken orders, risked a court-martial, and wrecked a multi-million-dollar helicopter to make it happen. After the ceremony, the SEAL captain found her. "My father asked me to give you this," he said, handing over a small wooden plaque. Carved into it were the words, "Sometimes the right order is the one you refuse to follow." Mira smiled. "Tell your father thank you for everything." "He said to tell you he'd fly with you any time," the captain replied, "and so would every SEAL who was in that gorge." Later, as she stood at the Pentagon terrace watching the sunset wash the city in gold, Ryan walked up beside her. "So," he asked, "was it worth it? The court-martial, the career damage, all of it?" Mira thought about the 180 SEALs who'd gone home to their families, about Colonel Harlan's son who was alive because she flew, about the choice she'd made when command had written them off. "Yeah," she said softly. "It was worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." And she meant it. As they turned from the railing, Mira looked once more at the fading sky. Somewhere out there, in war zones across the world, other pilots were flying, some facing impossible calls, some told to abandon people they might still save. She hoped they'd remember her story, that sometimes doing the right thing means defying orders and flying into hell anyway. Because that's what warriors do. That's what it means to serve. And Captain Mira Torres would do it all again in a heartbeat. The 180 SEALs she'd saved went on to fight thousands more missions, rescuing hostages, destroying terror cells, training the next generation. Each carried the memory of the pilot who refused to leave them behind. Years later, when Mira finally retired, all 180 showed up at her ceremony. They stood as one when she entered. A silent salute to the woman who'd proven that sometimes a single act of courage can change everything. Her story became legend in aviation schools, studied as a case in decision-making under fire, but remembered for something greater. That orders exist to guide us, yet conscience must be the final authority. That the most important mission is often the one no one approves, and that the true measure of a warrior lies not in blind obedience, but in knowing when to stand alone and do what's right. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Captain Joe's Stories for more incredible true tales of courage and sacrifice.